All right, everyone. Ian here with Minuteman Theory. I am the lead scary things expert.
And I'm Nick. I'm the philosophy guy, the less competent of the group.
I don't know about that. But
And
okay.
I am Brad, founder of Minuteman Theory. And today, this is episode 3 of our podcast. We finally have Nick on. Hopefully, moving forward, all of our podcast episodes will have all 3 of us. And today, we are talking about just the current state of the world, the crazy times we live in, war, and assassinations, and all sorts of interesting things. Maybe World War III on the horizon.
Could be. I mean, it very well could be. Yeah. I never, I got out of the Army in 2000 and in 2012, and I never thought that I'd be like, oh, I might be looking at recall. But yeah, here we are. And I'm like, oh man, if World War III kicks off, it's like I could be looking at recall. I'm a lazy civilian now, man.
Yeah, but do you? Isn't there a certain age where they won't recall you?
No, there's not. If you have a very specific set of skills, like they'll recall you, like for whatever. Usually that's more so for officers, but
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it's things have kind of gotten out of hand. It seems to me, it seems like people just don't know how to act, and it's all just kind of turning into anger. Everywhere you look, it's anger,
Yeah. And things are pretty polarizing.
Yeah.
Pretty divided. It's interesting. Nick, what do you think about the possibility of World War III on the horizon?
I don't know, to be honest. Like, with everything going on, obviously, like, it seems closer than it's definitely closer than it's ever been in our lifetime, I feel like. At the same time, like, the world has hit such peaks of near crisis and come back from it before. I really think it depends on how the major players address it, like how they confront and how much people try and take advantage of the crisis.
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that. I have a very bleak outlook on all that, just based on my military and law enforcement background. I have a very bleak look on that, so it might be better to ask, to propose that to somebody who's got more of an even keel on things than me, I would suppose.
I have a pretty bleak outlook on people who are in power, but a general positive outlook on humanity as a whole.
And that's fair. That is absolutely fair.
Because I think that with the kind of how broad the power structures are now, it's really difficult to get up to the top of it without being thoroughly corrupt.
Yes.
No, that's very true. I think it's very evident in things that have happened recently, like with our current president, Senior Biden, or Senior
who
Biden.
would never pardon his son, by the way.
Never, exactly.
Who would absolutely never pardon his son, who wouldn't even think about it, just pardoned his son.
Well, what's funny is that we were driving to the range, and Brad looks at me, he goes, "Did you know Hunter Biden, or did you know that Biden pardoned his son?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, I was like, "Yeah, okay, like that's politicians, man. That's what they do. They do exactly what they say they're not going to do. Like, there's not one of them that,
Well, what I don't get is, like, I don't know. It's understandable you wanting to pardon your son. I think I honestly don't blame him. I think it's the wrong move, because I think nobody should be above the law. But I totally understand him wanting to protect his son. The thing that there's a couple things with it that have confused me, and that's why was it for so long the narrative was he's not going to pardon Hunter, and because
the message was he's not corrupt but Trump is, and so he had to play out the whole Trump's corrupt, I'm not, therefore I'm not going to do this. Now the gig's up, like Trump's won, and so he's like, I can do whatever I want, doesn't matter. I mean, He's not even really functioning as president anymore.
I guess. Do you think it's one of his final middle fingers to the Democratic Party?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Because, like, sure, he's got nothing to lose, but the Democrats do.
Right.
Well, but it's interesting, too. I wonder, I don't know, this might get a little bit too conspiratorial, but now it's opening the door for conversations about, pre-pardons to people in the cabinet.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so like this, he kind of crossed this line of, like, obviously pardons in the past have been political, generally speaking. But this is, I feel like, is so blatantly self-serving that it's kind of open Pandora's box on, hey, we can now do whatever we want with this, which I feel like has been the trend over the last, 8 years of politics of, well, screw you, I'm going to do what I want, instead of like respecting the boundaries that were supposed to be there to keep things in check.
No, absolutely. And it's funny. I've had this conversation too. Like everybody knows, I'm in law enforcement, and I made the comment. I'm also on city council, and it's like, it's interesting to me that some of the things that, our mayor and some of our other council members get away with would land any other one of us in jail.
Mm-hmm.
But because they know the right people, or they're involved in politics, suddenly, the rules don't apply to them. It's like, that's not how this works. Either the rules apply equally to everybody, or they don't apply to anyone. Like that's how this goes.
Yeah, 100%. And
you could bring home $10 billion a year, but you're still subject to the exact same laws that, someone who brings home $1 a year is.
Well, I think that's how it should be.
Yes,
but that's not
right. No.
That's not how it is. So, like, that's why things with crimes with like bail, you could just pay bail and not have to sit in jail. That's a kind of a tax on poor people.
Yeah,
that's fair.
I also don't know an effective alternative, though, other than just people up, period.
I will say, yes, that may be a tax on the poor. However, we had a murderer who made more than any of us combined, and they made his bond the highest in Montana history, and he couldn't pay it.
So would the effective solution to that would be maybe a bail be based on a percentage of net worth or something?
Well,
so comparable to the person, not the crime.
I would say just no bail.
So like you just sit in jail.
In the Constitution, it says you have to have bail.
Yeah,
in the Constitution. So in Montana, in my experience, and I have quite a bit of it going at this point, the judges, if they are competent, will take in the fact that you make $10 million a year and use that as something, or you know what I mean. If they want, that's that. So basically, what happened was this guy murdered his wife or his girlfriend, or tried to murder his girlfriend, didn't succeed, but killed her boyfriend, and the bond was the highest in Montana history. He never got out.
Okay, but then. If a judge sets bail unrealistically high to where the person has no chance of paying it, then that's basically like having no bail.
Yeah, well, that also puts a lot of power in one person's hands.
However, that being said, they also have bail reduction hearings every month and a half.
Yeah. But so with the bail reduction hearings, are there appeals and stuff, or is it just whatever the judge says goes? There are appeals.
So basically, it's a deep dive into the person's criminal history. It's a deep dive into other law enforcement contacts they've had. It's, I will say, and I know that you probably won't agree with me, I will say that the majority of time, the judges here get it right.
Yeah,
I will say the majority of the time here they get it right.
I'd say that. I would like to believe, and maybe this is naive of me, but I would like to believe that we have more good judges across the entire nation.
Yes.
More good judges than bad judges.
Yes.
Same with police officers. I would like to believe that there are more good police officers than bad police officers.
Right.
Even though the bad ones do exist in both cases.
Yes.
I'd like to think that,
I think that's probably more true of America and probably generally Western countries. and not out of some kind of like ethnocentrism or whatever, but just by the pure fact that crime is relatively low, like compared to other parts of the world. I feel like if there was a high proportion of evil people in the world, like we would see that. But generally speaking, when you interact with folks, it tends to be positive. Like at worst, it's just annoying.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But I would also say that that depends on your social structure. You know what I mean? That depends on where you fall out on the spectrum. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure poor people probably have worse experiences or worse contacts than people who make. You tend to stay in your group, I guess. So
that's true. And I think that also speaks to the difficulty of poverty, because like poverty is so difficult to break out of, because everything that contributes to poverty fights against breaking out of it. So you have to completely like turn away from the entire world that you're living in to try and have a hope of breaking out of that.
Right. Definitely. But yeah, I mean, this is absolutely, you know what I mean? This is absolutely a can of worms. It just, like you said, it depends on, it's the politics of everything. That's the interesting, once you get to a certain point, it kind of feels like, I've seen it both ways. I've seen where money has gotten people out of situations, and I've seen where money has not affected anything. And I've seen where money has screwed people over. I mean, it's kind of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Well, because I think it's not just money. I think it's money plus connections and corruption. Like, because there are really, really rich people that have been really raked over the coals, some very publicly, and then there are then there are less rich people who have gotten off with like practically murder just because of who they know.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So speaking of rich people and murder,
yes,
you guys heard about the CEO. Oh man,
yeah,
I totally just blanked.
American, what was it?
United Insurance.
Yes, United Insurance.
Health,
yeah,
United Healthcare.
Yeah. He was assassinated. Dude had a
suppressed
gun. Yeah, suppressed. And whacked the guy.
And then there was dancing in the streets.
So I am 100% torn about this. I'm going to say it. I'm very. The CEO of that company is responsible, directly or indirectly, for the deaths of many, many, many Americans. Regardless of, those companies go out of their way to screw people over. That is what they do. You pay them money every month, and I've gone to insurance companies and don't, I can't breathe. I can't breathe for when I wake up in the morning. It's like, okay, then don't wake up in the morning. It's like, well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my understanding, okay, murder is wrong unless you are put in a situation where you have to defend your life. Okay,
or the life of someone.
Yes, we as a society.
Well, but then I would argue it's not murder.
Okay.
Yes. Murder is the unjust taking of a life.
Yes. Okay. So, at the same time, my understanding is that the person they currently have in custody, the alleged shooter, was actually pretty rich. He's kind of a rich kid who just wouldn't pay for his surgery, but the insurance wouldn't pay for his surgery because he made too much, and that's that's
why I hadn't heard what the motive was.
So I don't think there's been an official motive yet. I know that he had serious back problem. I've heard people also mention maybe something with his mom, though I haven't followed up on that. But he had a surfing accident.
The motive that I heard, and this was like 2 hours ago, was that he hurt his back while he was doing something on vacation, some kind of, and the insurance that he had wouldn't cover it, and he wouldn't pay for it either, and he kept running into all these issues, or he didn't have the money for it. I don't know. It's all kind of one big nebulous at this point. But my understanding is that if he really wanted to, he could have paid for the surgery. Again, that is all speculation. I don't have any proof of that, but that's what I'm hearing. So that, I will be honest with you, that kind of takes away my for the cause sort of
So
yeah.
So
here's
what?
I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say there are ways he could have gone about it that, yes, would have taken a whole lot longer. Well, so here's the thing. There's ways he could have gone about it to actually get it resolved. So in this case, like if the insurance wouldn't cover his surgery or whatever, and so he couldn't have the surgery, and then he goes and kills the CEO, that doesn't mean that now they're going to pay for his surgery.
Well,
like
somebody is.
But then he could have sued them. And yes, that would have cost a lot of money. It would have taken a long time. But he actually might have gotten a resolution instead of, killing the CEO and being, thrown in jail. Now, I would agree with you that healthcare is somewhat of a racket, and that the CEO of those companies are responsible for a lot of stuff, but I don't think it justifies murdering them. I think it's the same kind of thing. Like, if you don't like your state representative, you shouldn't go assassinate them.
Right.
You should go vote.
Right.
To put somebody else in there.
Like I said, I'm still. But have you ever dealt with daily chronic back pain?
No.
I do.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, some days are good, and some days I can feel it in my teeth, and I just want to curl up in a ball and just, you know what I mean?
Sure, but again, if you went and murdered a CEO because
Right.
they wouldn't pay for your back surgery, you're still going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. So when we
You won't, though, because eventually, once you get into the Department of Corrections, eventually somebody's going to end up paying for it if you scream loud enough about it.
Okay, but you could have done a lesser crime to
True.
get a lesser
Yes,
sentence.
that is true.
So
You got-
if we just look at
right.
if we just look at like the
I'm not saying it's right.
itself.
I don't want to
Right.
make it sound like it's right, because it's not what he did. I'm not saying that it's right.
Yeah.
but it's like, so
But what I'm saying is that I can understand where you know what I mean. If
The frustration.
yes, now that I realize that he's just another rich kid, it's like,
I think
can't really
even
get behind your cause as much as,
because the question is, so when is it justified to kill somebody? Obviously, I think that we would agree, like, in defense of your like human rights. So
yes,
somebody's trying to take your
absolutely.
life, liberty. But so then I think the other time where it'd be justified is in a just revolution, right? So I think
Right.
fundamentally an assassination is call for revolution. So does there need to be a revolution, a violent revolution to overthrow the healthcare system? I'm inclined to say no, which would absolutely not justify anybody assassinating a CEO. I would also suggest that it's not the CEOs of the healthcare companies that are the problem with the system. I think that they're working within the system that exists, and they're making a lot of money.
Products of the system.
Yeah, it's the system itself that's broken. It's the regulations and lack of regulations and all of that that's probably due largely to the lobbying powers of these corporations and whatnot. But it's because of, I think, government overreach and whatnot that created this environment for these companies to develop the way they have.
No, and that's absolutely fair. I feel like we need to open healthcare the same way that we open everything else, just pure free market capitalism.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
The only regulation I think that we need to potentially add to the healthcare system is remove everything except for transparency regulations. And you'll be able to see what costs what and why. So then you can make an informed decision as to where you're going to go for your healthcare. And the universal third-party payer of everybody goes through an insurance is doing nothing but driving costs up.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what a really good example of free market healthcare is LASIK eye surgery.
Yes.
Because
$10,000 an eye, and now you can get it for a couple grand, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think not even a couple grand. I think it's like $1,200 or something. And I think insurances are now starting to cover it, but for a long time,
Chiropractor.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole that
Right.
we gotta be,
Right. But I mean,
chiropractics is a religion, not a healthcare practice.
I see. I disagree, but okay. All right, I'll give it to you.
No, like legitimately, the founder was like, "I'm going to create this as a religion."
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's also not, as far as I'm aware, haven't been any like reliable studies to suggest that it actually makes any long-term improvements. I mean, that's partially like you also have to keep going back to the chiropractor over and over, right?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
but we can that's
Cross
like
that bridge when we
that's
get
a
to
really deep rabbit hole,
Right.
that we can avoid for now. But
I have a whole podcast just about chiropractic.
yeah,
Yes.
and but like the LASIK eye surgery. So yeah, it when it first came out, it was really expensive because it was new technology, it was a new procedure. Hardly anybody knew how to do it, so it was expensive. It was like $20,000 or something. And then as more and more people started getting it, and the technology improved, and more people started doing it in eye clinics, the price has reduced greatly, and now it's like one of the most affordable surgeries out there. And it's because insurance, up until recently, wouldn't cover it. And so, yeah, the eye clinics actually had to compete. They actually had to compete in the free market.
Well, and that tends to be the case. Like, I mean, that's why, like, it's what orthodontists, dentists, and the people that make prosthetics. I forget what they're called now. They ortho something.
Orthopedics.
But they tend to make the most money, but also cost the least comparatively, because there's so much less regulation there compared to everywhere else in the healthcare industry.
Right. There absolutely needs to be a balance, though, because you don't necessarily want to, walk into a clinic and they're like, "Oh, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we can fix your kidney problem," and you're just like, "Oh, how many of these have you done?" And they're like, "Oh, 2." "Oh, are you go to school for this?" "Oh, no, I just learned on the weekends."
Yeah.
There has to be some regulation in the healthcare industry just for safety.
But I don't know that has to be managed by the government. I mean, I
Yes.
think independent
I would
organizations can credential folks. I mean,
Right. And so then you'd look for the
It'd be like
healthcare seal of approval.
Right, or it's like I am certified by the Snake Oils Association of America. I'd be like, yeah, I'm probably not going to go to them.
Yeah.
now
Well,
that does require the individual to take on the responsibility of actually researching those organizations and stuff, which I think that we've gotten to a point where, and this, I don't know, this might be human nature, or it might be a result of our society where we just trust any big rubber stamp that says this is good.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we have to be careful. Like, did you know that I have a PhD?
Yes, I did know you had a
Yeah.
PhD.
Did you know that it cost me like $20?
And you did absolutely nothing to get it?
Oh, no. I made a monetary contribution to an institution of higher learning.
Yes.
Is that like my noble title?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. My impressive title. So I technically have an honorary PhD, but I didn't do anything really of significance to get it. So
do you guys know why we got in the situation they're at with like employers covering everybody's healthcare?
No.
So in the comments, tell me if I'm completely stupid and wrong, because I haven't actually like dug in to verify this. But from my understanding, during World War II, with the labor shortages, with all the men fighting overseas, since the labor was so scarce, there was kind of runaway wage increases as they were trying to entice labor to come to them as opposed to their competitors. So the federal government started limiting wage increases. So how did employers get around it? They said, hey, we can't pay you anymore, but we'll pay for your health insurance instead if you come work for us. And so then it just kind of became a universal standard that everybody was paying for health insurance so that people would work for them. And then it just stuck and became like federal law that now you have to do that.
Interesting.
So that's interesting because that same kind of thing happened with auto manufacturers. Auto manufacturers used to, because they couldn't increase the wages of their workers, they would just, give them a free car every other year or something. And so, you had these auto workers that were driving around brand new cars, but then something about it couldn't be taxed, but it was technically a bonus. And so then the government basically said, hey, you can't do that anymore or something. And so that's why that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that the healthcare stuff basically went the opposite way.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, no, now you have to.
Right.
Well, because then they pulled it into the whole like civil rights things of, oh, now your employer is responsible for you and they have to take care of you, which is the whole like labor versus capital sort of contest that we had throughout the Cold War.
Right.
Yeah. The laborers trying to own the means of production.
Oh God, you blood pressure rising.
What was that? There was some like sniper from World War II or something. And they asked him how many men he killed, and he said, "I haven't killed anybody. I've only ever killed communists." Or how many people have you killed? And he said, I never kill people. I've only killed communists.
That was Vietnam.
Was it Vietnam?
I think it was Vietnam. Yeah, I think it was Vietnam. Yeah, it's here. Let's go off on another tangent. It's interesting because we were just talking about this yesterday on our way to Sandpoint. I said, I've read both Mein Kampf. Well, I haven't read all the way through Mein Kampf and the Communist Manifesto, and I said I couldn't finish Mein Kampf because it was the worst. I couldn't even follow it, and the only reason I got through the Communist Manifesto is because it was so short.
Yeah.
You know what's
the Manifesto, Nick?
I have not. I have listened to Mein Kampf all the way through, though.
You've listened to it?
Yeah, I did an audiobook.
How did you manage?
I was a mail carrier at the time, so I was in my 5 hours a day. So I went through a lot of audiobooks and lecture series and stuff because,
right,
5 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week gives you a lot of time just to listen.
I read it, and it was like I got through it okay. But
as soon as he starts saying the government needs to seize the means of production by any means necessary, I'm like, okay, and I'm out.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
here's the thing: like he diagnosed the problems of society that were happening correctly. I think he just had a way off base solution.
Right.
Well, that's kind of like the Unabomber. I mean,
yeah.
He was spot on.
His manifesto, his manifesto was brilliant, except for he said, "Hey, let's blow everybody up to fix it."
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, and there is an excellent book that I would highly recommend called Hitler's Beneficiaries. It's kind of dry, but it goes over the specifics of Nazi economic policy and who benefited. So there are things in there that are very, very reminiscent of some current politicians. He pushed, we need to require businesses to give workers paid time off. And policies about assistance with loans and various things like that. Like the economic policies of the Nazis were very left-wing by today's standards.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, so let me ask you: do you? And this seems to be debated a lot. Do you think Nazis are far right or far left?
I think our modern conception of right and left is fundamentally flawed. I don't think that as we currently look at it, there is like such a thing because, and I think that the political compass idea gets closer to it, but there are people on the far right, so to speak, who are fundamentally really collectivist, just like people on the far left are.
Yes.
So I think that the dichotomy of right versus left doesn't it gives a kind of false binary way of looking at it that I don't think is accurate. I think the Nazis were totalitarian, absolutely. They were also socialist.
Well, I think that both sides. I think that both sides. The Nazis represent both sides. I genuinely do.
Well,
once you get to that point, it's like
I wonder if you took the political compass as a two-dimensional graph, if you took that and wrapped it into a sphere, I wonder if that would be a little more accurate. So
it might, because fundamentally, go ahead.
Once you go super totalitarian, way up at the top, left and right doesn't really matter anymore. And when you go really so low, super liberal, libertarian, left and right doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So if you look, the communists and the fascists hated each other. I don't know why. They literally
fundamentally
did the exact same thing, just in a different country.
So the national socialism of the Nazis was basically race-based communism.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Communism was class-based, whereas the Nazis made it race-based. So the communists was, we need to support the working class and kill all the capitalists. And the Nazis said, we need to support the Aryans and kill everybody else. Then take their stuff and redistribute it, because the Nazis were just as redistributive as the communists were. They just after a race.
The concentration camp had barrels of gold from the Jewish, from the Jewish community.
I had a professor that I took a Jewish Holocaust course, and he had some German relatives that they had what they called their Dutch furniture, which was furniture that was confiscated from Dutch Jews and given to this Aryan family. Because that's what they did. They shoved the Jews into concentration camps and then redistributed all of their property.
Yeah, no, and that's why I say Nazis and communists are the same thing.
Well, the problem was Hitler saw communism as a Jewish plot to take over the world, which it kind of was a plot to take over the world. How Jewish it was, I don't know, but
yeah. We've got a dog over here.
We do. She's pretty sweet most of the time.
Indeed. Well, not to completely shift the subject, but communists in World War II, we all own Mosin Nagants. So we're going to do some Mosin Nagant shooting.
We are.
Nick, you should do some Mosin Nagant shooting.
I should. I need to get a good outdoor range to go to.
Yeah, are there any near you, or?
So there are a few that I can go to. I have to get a hunting license, because they're free if you have a hunting license. They're operated by.
How about you just move to Montana? I mean, just throwing it out there.
Yeah,
See, I really like my job right now, so and my wife really likes her job too. But I thoroughly want to spend a lot of time in Montana because it looks gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh man, without a doubt.
Reminds me of where I grew up in Washington, just more free.
Yes.
That's kind of the unfortunate thing. Growing up in Washington, part of it was probably that I was a kid and somewhat ignorant of politics and all that sort of thing, and of history. But growing up in Washington, it seemed like a really great place, and then it seemed to kind of go downhill starting when I was kind of in my early 20s. I remember the first big thing.
Oh, see, no.
I know it's probably going downhill before then, but that's
you have a great awakening in your 20s.
That's when I started to notice. Was I had my computer repair shop, and they were trying to pass basically a gun registry.
Right.
And I was like, no, we need to vote no on this. And I was so upset when it passed. And I was like, how could people... I mean, it was written kind of deceptively as well, but yeah.
I do think that there's something to be said for our hometown. Now, I think that part of it is once they discovered that they can make really good wine, that changed the culture. But yeah. I do think growing up, because I can remember in 2004 in elementary school, we ran a mock election, and Bush ended up winning. in our little Washington town. And I know that Eastern Washington's more red than Western Washington, but still, like Walla Walla was like the county seat. It was a pretty blue spot as far as Eastern Washington goes. But I was talking to a coworker about that like today or yesterday, and she grew up in California, and she did the same thing when she was in elementary school, and she voted for Bush, but she remembers that she was really like bullied by her peers because she voted for Bush because it was California and nobody voted for Bush, like except for her and a couple other people. Whereas I feel like our hometown was pretty purple for like that time period. And then
it was pretty split.
Yeah, because it was still a farming community. It was a relatively like liberal area of Eastern Washington, but it was still a farming community, farmed, wheat and onions. And then I think the shift happened largely when like wine country came in, and then I think the state maybe started to shift a little bit more too. And it's gotten, while it was always a blue state, I do think that it took a nosedive after the 2010s or so.
Yeah. See, I'm a purple. I'm a diehard purple. There's just no, I don't believe anybody has, you get past the state level and nobody literally listens to you. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And I'm very like yellow when it comes to federal. And then the more local you get, the more red I get.
Right.
Yellow.
Libertarian.
Oh, okay. See, for me,
federally, leave me alone.
Yes, right.
Yeah, but I don't know. I would just call myself politically homeless.
Yeah.
Because I don't really align with if I had to align, it would probably be somewhere between the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party. But unfortunately, the Libertarian Party has done me a disservice more than once.
Yes.
And they have constantly been putting people in there that are woke.
Yep.
Which is not libertarian in my opinion.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't feel represented by any of the major political parties.
I say that if Minuteman takes off, we start our own political party called the Minuteman Party. Minuteman Party. And we just like, we're like Teddy Roosevelt back in the day. Like we're just,
the whole point of it is to take power away from the federal government and give it back to like towns, not even states, give it to the towns.
Yeah.
And that's funny because that's what I'm trying to do as a city councilor. And it is not working at all.
Because the people that want power don't want to get rid of their power. Like
exactly, and all I want to do is I want less power for everybody.
Of power. So the school that I work for is currently associated with the Acton Academy Network. So named after Lord Acton, and he's one of the quote of "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." So the more power you have, the more corrupt you are, nearly by the principle of having that power.
Yeah. I wonder, though. I wonder if that's not always true, though. I wonder if you truly can have a super powerful, altruistic, righteous person.
Ron Paul.
Only if
Ron Paul. I'm going to say it. Ron Paul, my hero, my man among men.
That can only happen if they submit to something more powerful than them.
True, absolutely.
So like it has to be somebody that has a higher ideal. I mean, and typically religion serves this purpose, like to where you're not serving yourself, you're serving something above you. Then you're not actually all powerful. You're still serving something else. Once you become all powerful and you become the god, then there's no stopping you.
Well, but you said that the more powerful you become, the more corrupt you are.
But if you willingly give up some of that power, you become less powerful. Not to get like all religious. I also think that's the story of the New Testament. But
sure. No, that's fair. Ron Paul. Okay.
My hero.
What do you think? What do you think of Rand Paul?
I am not a fan. The apple fell so far from the tree on that. It's ridiculous. There are some things that I agree with that he did when he took the stand, when he filibustered Congress because the National Defense Authorization Act was getting ready to pass, and he filibustered. I was all about that. But again, your and I stance on abortion are diametrically opposed. So that's kind of where I'm getting that from, and kind of his willingness to go after terrorism, quote unquote, the way that he has kind of pissed me off, and his monetary policies have pissed me off too.
I don't know. I like as far as his monetary policies, he has for the past many years proposed a way to balance the budget, and it always gets shut down.
Yes, but he always votes with the budget. You know what I mean?
Well,
and he always votes with whatever budget. I'm not saying that he's not putting it. I'm saying that if he voted no, if he said, "Look, I have this budget," and then he voted no, which is what I do on city council. I'm like, "Hey, I have this thing," and then like, "No, we're not going to do that." I'm like, "Okay, fine, then no." I would be more inclined to, you know what I mean, to go with that.
I also think that the higher up in politics you get, the messier it gets. So
absolutely.
It's like I fully think that the reason that there's not purely principled federal politicians, generally speaking, is because they get weeded out pretty quick. Because if you're principled, you're not going to toe the party line. And if you're not going to toe the party line, then you don't serve the party. So they're not going to put money in your campaign, or they're going to dig up dirt to put against you so you don't win, and therefore you don't have that power.
And to be fair, the higher up in government you get, the harder it is to represent the people you're supposed to represent. Because like, you know, the like even at a state level, the problems that we have here in Libby, Montana are vastly different than the problems they have in Billings, Montana.
Right.
And so our state representative has to represent the people here and the people there, even though our problems and our interests are different.
Right.
Which is where the federal government should only have influence over those areas in which those two communities intersect, which is, you know, very few. Like where you're in agreement.
Well, the federal government should basically be national defense.
Yes, thank you.
National defense and disputes.
I have a new thought on the federal government. The only reason the federal government should ever be used is in between disputes between states. Like if a state is being too infringing on its people, then the government should step in, but it should not have anything to do with the private lives of citizens.
My boss even proposed what I think actually is a decent idea of disbanding the national military and then putting all of that into state National Guard and militias and whatnot.
So that's funny.
The federal government is required to ask the states for troops if they want to engage in any military activities.
That's funny because that was what my proposal was. I'm a big fan of bringing all the troops back home, all the troops back home and having a National Guard sort of deal, you know what I mean, or a state guard.
I think that's a good idea, but I think there has to be some standards put in place because there
has to be a Navy.
Yeah, well,
that's it because that's really
no, but I mean,
true. Well, because that's the part that crosses kind of boundaries is the ocean.
Yes, right.
Well, but there also needs to be standards for the National Guard because you don't want to say like, oh crap, we're going to war with China. Okay, we're going to pull all the soldiers from all these different states.
Right.
They've all been trained different. They all have different weapons platforms. They all have different whatever. That's going to cause all sorts of problems. Some things need to be standardized,
right,
to a certain extent.
Right, and that's fair. I mean, you could definitely come up with guidelines or standards for that sort of thing, but say, hey, look, these are the standards, and then back off.
Because you don't want like you have a battalion of Texans and they've all got machine guns and rocket launchers and crap, and then you got a battalion of Californians and they've got air guns.
Right. Right.
And then you've got the Texans that are, blowing everything up, and you got the Californians that are like, oh, what are your pronouns?
Right.
There has to be some sort of standardization federally.
Right.
Could that, though, maybe not, but could that be similar to like the NATO expectations, like a certain percentage of your state budget spent on your National Guard? Or do you think that's too loose?
I think that's too restrictive.
You think that's too restrictive?
I think it's too restrictive.
Yeah,
I think if we're going to give states their rights back and we're going to say, okay, it is now a state militia, you got to let the states handle their own stuff. Like, that the standards in Montana would be harder than the standards in California.
Well,
there's no doubt about it.
Sure. But I think that I don't think the standard should be budgetary. I think it should be everybody needs to adopt the same weapons platform,
the same military, the same way of style of speaking.
Yeah, the same. Same communication, command structure.
Yes,
but I would almost argue that needs to be developed by the heads of each state militia, not by some federal organization.
And that's true, but they would need to get together. They would need to get together, and but see, that's where I said that, you would need a general from each state, and they would all get together, and they would be like, hey, look, this is what we're doing,
Yeah, it would be like periodic military congress of the state.
Right.
Yeah, because you don't want to end up overseas in a war, and like the Texans are like, okay, we're going to do the brisket barbecue, and the Californians are like, what is that?
Right.
Or brisket barbecue to them means, something completely different.
Right.
But I also think that there needs to be a certain standard, just like a base standard of training.
Yes.
That everybody agrees to.
Okay, that's fine. I understand that. Like,
and so
maybe you could
go above and beyond, but there is a bar that has to be met.
So what if there was a federal? What if there was a federal basic training? What if there was a federal basic training, and then that, you know what I mean? You go from there for each. You know what I mean? You have a basic training for basic recruits, and then you have a basic training for officers, and you know what I mean?
I don't think so.
I haven't been in military, but I suspect that now you have, so you can tell me if I'm completely off base, but isn't part of basic training is to like break you down and build you up into the branch that you're in? If all these diverse militias are that different, then you're not being built up to be a member of that militia. You're being built to be a like no-name soldier or a federal soldier.
But that's fair. But at the same time, it would get everybody on the same page as far as basic operating procedures.
No, so I don't think that it should be a federal boot camp, because I think that there should just be standards that have to be met. Because then, let's say that Montana figures out a more efficient way to train their soldiers to meet that.
Okay.
Then they're not stuck with the same whatever's going on. States are then allowed to innovate.
And that's fair. That is,
then maybe Wyoming comes up with a really good way of training their soldiers.
Right.
This might be kind of a weird way to look at it, but what if your militiamen were required to go through basic in another state?
Ooh. That was kind of where I went with the whole federal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But that way, like, states could innovate and that sort of thing, but there could also be pressure on states like, hey, you need to up your game because the folks we're getting from you are garbage.
So here's my thing. I would be okay with having a federal military, right? Like, or having some form of federal, like Navy, Marine, whatever the case may be. I'm okay with that being federal, because there would be problems that the United States has to solve, and instead of calling up the militias to do it, let's be honest with ourselves here. The chances of America being invaded are very, very slim.
Yeah.
But the chances of, let's see here. So the chances of one of our allies being invaded, but even then, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, do we want to get involved?
The poor Canadians,
allies,
the poor Canadians just lost more of their gun rights.
They did. God. Yeah. Trudeau's up. Never mind. I can't say what I want to say. So I'm just keeping it.
Hey, this is America. You can say what you want.
Yeah, but me too, man.
That's true. At least he's on his way out.
Allegedly.
I suppose if he can pull freezing protesters' bank accounts, he could try and pull something else.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's why, you know what I mean? I think I genuinely believe that we could be doing better. We could have more rights. We could be doing things better on the federal side, and that's just the way it goes, because
I think the way to do better is to reduce it.
I agree. I agree.
Bloated.
I agree.
I would argue that a lot of state governments are too bloated too.
Right.
Because the process of making things better requires experimentation. And when you have one thing, especially one thing that doesn't do anything quickly, you can't really experiment. And so everybody's going to suffer with the garbage that ends up getting through, as opposed to, because the genuine critique of moving power to the states is some states are going to be more garbage than the federal government, and people are going to suffer. That's true.
Right.
But I think that some states will be way better than the federal government, and other states will be able to learn from that. Or people will move out of the garbage states, and those states will lose their economy and power and whatnot, and then devolve into nothing.
No, and I think that's just it. I think we need to go back to states kind of paving their own way, getting the federal government out of everything. Like that was one of the things that Gianforte was running on, was getting the feds out of ranching in Montana, and I was 100% behind that. They were very proud of what they did. So I spoke with Austin Knudsen. We were at a shooting match together one time, and he said, I'm not gonna. He said that one of the things that they were fighting the feds on was getting the feds out of the USDA out of ranching, and he said that they were being kind of successful at it. You know what I mean? And that's awesome. I feel like the feds have taken over the free market capitalism aspect of our country. Like let people make their own decisions as far as what they want to do and how they want to go. Yes, there should be some standards. However, at the same time, I don't need the federal government telling me that I have to have insurance or else.
Well, that's largely, as I'm working on trying to figure out what specifically going to be in this video I'm working on. That's how the colonies were even before we were independent. Like, for the most part, the reason why we had Revolutionary War is because the crown, for the most part, left the colonies alone. They were founded for lots of different reasons. About half were religious, the other half were economic, and there were like 3 that were just political experiments. And so long as they stayed loyal to the crown and engaged in trade, and then supported them in the military conflicts and whatnot, they could pretty much do whatever they wanted with their own localities. It wasn't until the king said, oh, hey, now you have to pay me all this money on all these things I've never taxed before, that the people start saying, hey, that's not okay. We've been free this entire time. Keep the status quo, or we're obviously fighting a war. So like even the success of the colonies before we were a country were based upon the fact that each colony and each town could kind of decide how they ran themselves based on what's best for their town.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that's what needs to happen, is more power needs to be given to local governments. It needs to be decentralized.
Yes.
Because there needs to be, part of the problem is there's no real consequence for being a snake at the federal level. Like, so long as you can hide it good enough, and that's really just simply being in cahoots with the other folks that are also trying to hide their corruption, then you're going to get away with whatever you can for the most part. Whereas if everybody like on your city council or whatnot, and they're a jerk, you can be like, hey, you're a jerk. I'm not going to be your friend anymore. I'm not going to, you don't get to be part of this community in the same way that you were. So there's social repercussions on a local level that you just can't put on national politicians.
Yeah. Well, and that is fair. However, I don't think a lot of people adhere to that. I can say with 100% certainty that once I realized who the movers and shakers were in this town, I backed off. And I have not been back to their businesses. I have no interest in being in their businesses. However, some people that say that they are anti this or that person still continue to spend their money at this person's business. That's their right. However, that it doesn't really, my money doesn't really mean anything, or my lack of money doesn't mean anything unless I have other people who are backing me in that decision. But it just doesn't seem like here locally, at least, you may disagree with their politics, but you're still going to be like, well, I'm going to go buy X, Y, and Z from them. And that's my issue, is that, people just, they do what's easy and not necessarily what's right.
Well, so I think that's related to a couple different things. I know Libby's small. What do you know the population of Libby generally?
2,700.
Yeah, I think it's $3,000. We'll just say
Yeah.
$3,000.
That's in Libby proper, though. We have a big group of people that are outside the city limits, but are still like part of Libby. It's probably like 6,000 to 10,000 people if you
something like
include
that. Yeah.
like
So
the
even
gas.
if you just do Libby proper, that's still too big for the social component to take play, I think, because there's so many like sub communities within Libby that Libby's not a community; it's a conglomeration of communities. It's like
right.
for the social component to really take a play, it really has to be like every neighborhood. But I think the other component is with how just technology has allowed the interconnectivity. It used to be you lived or died based on the people in your village, like that.
Right.
Those are the people that you relied on, so you either got along or you died. We don't have that anymore, so people can pick and choose who they hang out with, and so then they get into these echo chambers. I think that's largely contributed to the division of like you're not forced to interact with people that are decent people but you disagree with on the regular, and try and figure out how to come to grips with that and work together, because you can pick and choose so much who you interact with. And I don't necessarily know how to fix that, because I don't think we should say you can't interact with people who live more than 10 miles from you.
Right.
But I think that is one of the like devastating consequences of the success of Western society.
Well, I think the solution is really simple, but a lot of people aren't going to like it. And I think people need to quit focusing on politics as much and start focusing on building organizations and communities that further the things that they think are right.
Yes. Yeah. I that's fair.
So that means get a group of like-minded people and start doing things in your community to affect good change. So, if you see that there's old people in your neighborhood that their yards aren't getting mowed and stuff because they're old and they can't afford to do it and they physically can't do it, instead of complaining to the government about, hey, their lawn is overgrown, get you and a couple buddies and go around with mowers and mow their lawns.
Mm-hmm.
Or, support organizations that do that. Or, go to a church that does outreach in your community, of whatever faith you believe in. Or like I said, just create a group of people that can affect positive change in your community in the way that you think it should be done.
I also think that it's important too to really focus on but by community, I don't think that it should be like your city per se. It's who's next door. It is literally who you can walk to their house and help them. And
I honestly disagree with that. I disagree with the whole, it needs to be, who is next door. I feel like we could build. That's why I initially kind of this whole Minuteman thing kind of sparked my kind of piqued my interest, because it's like, man, I can take people out and train them in things that I am passionate about, i.e. firearms and firearm safety, right? It's not just my neighbors. It's not just people who are local. We've had people who are from the Yak. We've had people from Troy.
They're somewhat local.
Well, okay. But what I'm saying is that, ultimately, if this whole thing takes off, I'd love to have people from wherever come in and train, but I can train them in these things.
I think that's kind of the mission of our podcast and our YouTube channel and our blog and that sort of thing, is we can create a virtual community of like-minded people that can affect positive change in the ways that we think are good all across the nation and maybe even across the world.
Right.
I do agree that you should take care of the people that are immediately
yes. Oh, absolutely. Mow their lawn, shovel their snow. Yes, but I also believe that larger outreach is a super important piece too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But again, I think it shouldn't be. Oh, go ahead.
I think that I envision what we do is kind of like a Minuteman guild, so to speak, where we are equipping each other to go out and serve our communities. It's like I'm in no way am I saying you ignore those outside. What I'm saying is, yeah, I think that the solution is relationships with people.
No,
and
fair. Absolutely.
relationships with people that you don't necessarily want to have relationships with. Sometimes.
There's a few.
Yeah.
So, and I think the best way to do that is to get a somewhat random sample, but also of people who, like, if something happens, they're right there. So, like, we have all this technology, and it's great. But if things collapse, who do you need to have? Who do you need to be able to rely on? And it's the people that are right near you, and that they're the easiest to, like, I'm going to go over to your house and hang out because it's 2 blocks down, sort of thing.
Now, did you say Minuteman Guild?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I heard you.
I envision it more like, the old school guilds of their craftsmen that come together and work together towards each other's success or anything, but they still work in their own individual areas and have their own individual shops.
Yeah. No, so but I thought I heard you that, and immediately it popped into my head. We represent
I'm not gonna lie, I thought of World of Warcraft in South Park, but I mean, whatever.
Yeah, okay.
So if we do ever start a Minuteman political party, that's how. If anybody gets elected, we step up. We represent the Minutemen.
Yeah.
Okay, but I agree with it all. But I think the major point is, instead of saying, "Oh, I want my government to enact this change I think is good," you need to be the one that goes out and enacts that change. You need to be the one that acts. You can't try to force other people to act in ways that you think they should, and you can't expect anybody to do what you want, I guess.
So I can tell you from experience, if you act a certain way or do a certain thing, it will attract people who act a certain way or do a certain thing.
Yeah.
You and I are the perfect example. I can guarantee you, if we hadn't have raised our hand and said we want to run for city council, we would have never met.
Yeah.
We were two separate, not social, but two separate lifestyle. I don't even know lifestyles.
Your paths wouldn't have crossed.
Yes, our paths wouldn't have crossed. But because we stood up and said, "Hey, I want to be a part. I want to be the part that affects the change," that's how we ended up becoming friends.
Yeah.
So, like you said, and it's funny because with the whole firearms thing, after talking with people, they're like, "Hey, I want to get more into this. I want to, people have never touched a firearm. Hey, I want to get more into this." I just helped 2 people buy their first AR-15. I'm very proud of that. They didn't know what they may have known, but they didn't. Now that I'm helping them and getting them involved, it's like it feels good because I had these people that I know own these guns that I've helped initiate that spark in. So if you act a certain way, and you do certain things, it's going to attract people who act that certain way and do those certain things.
Yeah.
And
not to go off on a tangent, but speaking of AR-15s, I finally entered the 21st century. I got a red dot.
I'm so proud of you, man.
Well, we'll see. It's an experiment. It was a very cheap red dot.
Is it the?
It's not the Bushnell.
Oh,
it's not
come on, man!
No.
I told you were going to be my guinea pig.
This is cheaper than that one, so it's going to be a real guinea pig.
Oh.
We might just take it to the range and it fails immediately and it's whatever, or we might be pleasantly surprised.
So that's another thing where I'd like to kind of take this is to start testing some of these things. You know what I mean? Like really, really test things. Like I'm not saying, "Oh, this is unboxing." Like, "Oh, this is." No, I mean like, I'm going to put a pick rail on my shotgun and we're going to take this scope out and see what happens.
Yeah. Push things to the limit.
Yeah.
I can tell you what the limit is for an A2 birdcage, and that is 1 rock. Because I need a new muzzle device too. But anyway, back on topic.
Yeah, anyway, if you do good things, it will attract good people. That's just the way that it goes. If you reach, and I can tell you this from a police officer standpoint too, man. I have made friends in law enforcement that I never ever would have even crossed paths with, but because I was trying to help them out and trying to do the right thing. They saw that, and we ended up becoming friends.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I can be proud of that.
I think it goes beyond doing good things, connects you with other good people. I think that is true, but I think it's basically what you reap is what you sow, and what you do is the type of person you attract. If you're a criminal doing bad things, you're going to attract other criminals that are doing bad things.
100%.
So
it's funnily about like what your values are, because what you value is what you're trying to achieve. And if you find somebody else going after the same thing, it's a lot easier to work together. You'll get a lot closer to what your goal is if you're working together. So like really what your community should be is anybody willing to sacrifice for the same thing that you are. Like those things that you value, and that's like what we've been calling like doing good things. Like, but that's our moral order and our values.
The army is exactly like that. You know what I mean? You get stuck with people from all over the country. You've never met a day in your life, and you expect them to care about you to the point where they would give up your own life for you. But there are some very, very core things that you share, and that is a die-hard willing to give your life for the Constitution and protect other people. Like that is what it all. And it's the same thing with police work. You know what I mean? We take an oath for very specific things, to protect the Constitution of the United States, protect the Constitution of Montana. And yes, there are some people in there that you are going to find that are not good people. However, the overwhelming majority of people that I've met we all share the exact same goal.
And there are mechanisms in place to eject those not good people if they're not good enough.
100%.
Right? And I think that's something too that are kind of this. I don't know if it's the radical libertinism of modern America. This idea that you have to kind of allow everybody, whereas I think there's value in saying, yeah, no, you don't fit. You can't be part of this, because otherwise you can't define what you are if you are everything, sort of thing.
Right.
Well, I think that's a lot of that's the argument that a lot of really hardcore neo-progressive type liberals is they say, oh, it's all nebulous and it's all everything, and so therefore you can't define it. And I think that kind of erodes the great experiment of what the United States is. I think we are a melting pot. We have all these different cultural influences from all the people that have immigrated here and all that sort of thing. And I don't think that anybody should ever give up their cultural influences and their traditions and that sort of thing. But they have to assimilate into the American culture. And the American culture is a culture of freedom and a culture of appreciating other cultures.
Yes. And I also don't think the idea of a melting pot necessitates that it's homogenous either. Like,
no,
it's absolutely reasonable for us to say, hey, like this is our values. They're different from yours, and that's okay. We'll pursue our thing over here. You pursue your thing over there, and we'll respect each other's rights to do that. I think you're wrong, but stay over there and do your thing, and I'll stay over here and do my thing. As opposed to this, oh, you have to integrate absolutely everybody into your group or community or whatever. It's like, no, there are some people that, like, again, back to the values. If their values are off enough, like, so the school that I work at is very geared towards letting the students kind of develop their own community and their own standards and kind of operate on what they find valuable.
Montessori?
I describe it as Montessori plus civics.
Okay.
It's
curious.
It's got some of the Montessori in terms of like learner led and that sort of thing, but we also explicitly, like, the learners draft a contract that those are the rules for their studio, like, or for their classroom.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I'd be interested to tour that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been the best job I've had.
Okay. No, I'm very curious.
Oh, you should tell them about the little
hold on. Let's go back to where we were before. But I want to know more about this. I genuinely want to know more about this.
But let's finish what I was at, then we can talk more about it if you want, because I love talking about it too. But so, but anyways, so with the values, it's a matter of, like, we talked about they decided, and this was them brainstorming and deciding that their core values for their class is a work ethic, leadership, and honesty.
Hell yeah.
So I asked, and when we've had discussions, I think this discussion was with middle school though, was so what happens if you have somebody come into your classroom and they're like, oh, well, I just value relaxing all the time. Can you have them as part of your student? And they came to the conclusion like, no, if we disagree enough on what the core values are, it's just not going to work because they're trying to do different things. So the learners have the ability to eject somebody from their classroom and say, hey, this isn't working. This isn't a good fit for you. More power to you. Go seek what you need somewhere else. But this is not okay. And they have in the past said you need to, at minimum, take a break and reevaluate your values. So I think that that's valuable in being able to say to people, we're not aligning. This isn't working. Beyond just because you do that in the economic sphere with business all the time. I think you need to be able to do that community-wise too, and nobody has the balls to do that, I think, most of the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings.
But it's not helpful for anybody because it's not helpful for them to be in a community that doesn't align with their values, and it's toxic to the community to have members like that.
Right. Well, that's how I approach business too, is if I have somebody approach me and they want to do business with me, I have a conversation with them and I basically, set expectations. I say, okay, well, what do you want done? And they say, oh, X, Y, Z. And I say, okay, I can do that. It's going to look like this. It's going to take this long and it's going to cost this much. And, if they're like, okay, that sounds exactly what I'm looking for, then we can work together. Sometimes they go, that's a little too much, or, oh, actually, I want it done this way instead, or whatever. And then I say, like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Like, just recently, I had somebody call me, and they're like, hey, I know that you have this type of equipment, and you do this sort of thing. Can you do this thing for me? And I had to say, no, I don't do that, even though I probably was capable of doing it. It's just not part of what I provide, and I can't, because it's something I don't have a lot of experience with. I can't guarantee my work, and I had to decline that job, and they were understanding. But yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that, but
I think it's always about setting expectations and ideals out front at the very beginning. Right.
Yeah, well, and recognizing what's the purpose of what you're doing, so everybody's on the same page. Like we talk often about, like, why are we doing this thing? And if we can all agree on the why, then it can be tricky. But then you just are figuring out the how. Like the why is the hard part.
It's interesting because Brad and I have different religions. We have different, we have different things that we kind of, subscribe to. But we definitely subscribe to one thing 100%, and that is helping our community better themselves.
Mm-hmm. And we have similar ideas of what that looks like too. Right.
But at the same time, there are some very core things that are separate that we don't necessarily agree on or see eye to eye. But that's fine. I mean, that's literally the American way. You don't have to agree on everything. And you can have a conversation. You can have a very calm, very collected. We've had plenty of conversations where it's like, hey man, I don't agree with I don't, not that I don't see eye to eye with you. Abortion is a perfect example.
Yeah.
He is, I am pro-choice. I'm very much pro-choice. He is not. But we can have a conversation about it and still be respectful, because that's how America, that's what America is. It is what it is,
Well, and so long as you agree to like the core things that are driving you, like what you hold as the highest ideals, then the rest of the stuff, it's important to expose yourself to the people that disagree, because otherwise you end up like a slave to your ideology.
Yes.
And if you're a slave to your ideology, you're not actually pursuing your ideals. Like you're serving the mouthpiece of whoever is speaking that ideology.
Right. And that's just it, and here's the other thing. If he brought up a point that I was like, oh man, I really, really, really can't disagree with that, I'd listen to him and I'd be like, okay, it may or may not.
I got some of those points we should talk about.
Yeah, I'm willing to have that conversation. You know what I mean? Like I'm 100% willing. But gun control is another one. if you can bring me a point that's valid enough that, you know, I'm willing to, you know, that's valid enough to where I'm willing to give up my guns, I'm willing to give up my guns. It's going to have to be a pretty spectacular, valid point, but I'm willing, you know what I mean? I'm willing to make those concessions.
Yeah, I don't know. So with gun control, I would agree. Yes, if they're legitimate
in principle,
yes,
if somebody could provide something that proved something wrong in my understanding of things, then you know I would concede. But I think that it is, and maybe I'm ignorant. I don't know, but I just think that that's impossible with gun control because. I mean, every argument I've ever heard has always had some sort of but or some sort of workaround or some other solution than take away the guns. You know,
right, and you know it would have to be we all got knocked in the head in the section where we all knew how to build guns, and suddenly the genie's back in the bottle. You know, but I mean, if somebody, you know what I mean? If somebody had a very, very valid, I'm willing to listen to anybody. You know, I really am. I'm willing to listen to everybody because, again, that's where I find flaws in my logic.
Well, now,
you know,
I think that
I find flaws in what I, you know.
Yeah.
I think that our, like, I don't know if it's modern society. I personally blame the structure of the school system too, because I'm in the schools. But like at the school, we have school-wide rules, but we also say every single rule at the school is up for debate. If you have a reason why you think the rule should be changed, convince the head of school, and if you convince him, he'll change the rule. But it promotes that kind of individualism of like in traditional schools, I feel like it's what the teacher says matters. Whereas in our school, we're trying to say, no, what you say matters. You're wrong a lot, but so are we.
Right.
So like
right.
The whole point is I'm not the end all be all of information. I'm here to try and help you figure stuff out because I'm stupid a lot. And if you just relied on me, you'd be stupid too. So maybe you can be better than me if you use your own faculties. Where there's too much, I think, in our society of relying on whatever the person in charge tells us to do or tells us is right. And so people listen to the people they trust in the news or in politics or celebrities because, oh, they're the person in charge. They're important and I'm not. As opposed to actually like respecting your own faculties of reason and thinking things through and looking for it yourself. Like that's where freedom is.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I was a cop during COVID, and man, I got to tell you, I lost a lot of faith in humanity. Like, I really did. I was like, what are you doing? Like, I don't understand this. This makes no sense. My neighbors they call the police. The neighbors aren't social distancing. Okay. And like what? How does that affect you, or how does that affect me? Like,
and why don't you just go over and civilly say, "Hey, I care about you guys. I don't think this is safe." Like that would be a much more productive way of approaching that quote unquote problem.
Instead, I responded, "We're not the Gestapo, and I don't give a shit." And I hung up the phone. Kind of got me in a little trouble. I mean, whatever.
And if you did actually go out and enforce that, then you'd just be reinforcing the tyranny of the person in charge gets to decide how you act.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So you have to tell Ian about your little government experiment with your learners.
Yes, I'm intrigued now. Very much so.
So last year, so we've so far made it that. So we do kind of shorter sessions instead of like full semesters and stuff. So we do 5 or 6 weeks on, 1 week off, generally speaking. So the first session is kind of like getting to know the systems. We go through the academics that they'll be doing, that sort of thing. And then the second session is, okay, now you have to write your contract. So we set up kind of an experiential learning thing to where they can experiment with different types of government.
Okay.
So last year we walked them through Rome.
I don't mean to stop you. Has communism ever succeeded?
They haven't tried it yet. We've only done this with elementary age kids. That would probably be experimented with in middle school, which we're getting there, I hope. But so though they have kind of had inklings. Anyways, so last year we did Rome. So we started them off with a monarchy, and then we made specific rules where our goal was we want to make this a game that we can just be hands off and let it run itself. because we don't want them to think that we're pulling any strings. Like, they need to experience this for themselves.
Okay.
So they started with a monarch, and they had a system to depose the monarch, which they went through a few. It was interesting. The very first one was purely a popular vote. And then people found out, oh, she's really not good at running things. So they deposed her.
No way.
Yep. They deposed her.
No way.
They elected a queen who was actually like the most competent in the studio. Then they had the option to, under certain circumstances, like abolish the monarchy and establish a Senate, which would be like a representative sort of thing.
Yes, right.
But then the Senate had the ability, we had some pressures put in place where the Senate had the ability to elect somebody as dictator, who then has the ability to step down from that position if they so chose, which they obviously did not so choose. So it walked them through like these different ways and have them actually experience what it's like to have these different types of government. This year ran, I think, even better than last year. We tried to simulate kind of Anglo-Saxon England.
Yes. Okay.
So we split it up into 4 different groups. We said, okay, you guys are now noble houses. Establish your houses. So we had them think through, what are the values of your house? What are your symbols? So they kind of like created this group. And then it was a very similar thing. Every Friday, the middle schoolers came in. They were the Vikings attacking. So this is external pressure. And they had a system where at the beginning, the wealthiest house, the head of their house was the king or queen. And then there was a system of you could declare civil war. And like then there would be like risk rules basically, and you could buy troops, that sort of thing. But we also had the rule of everything the king wanted to pass as a rule had to be voted on, but you voted with money. So they earned money for doing like research and that sort of thing.
Way.
So every coin you spent was 1 vote. So the more money you had, the more political influence you had. But when you spent that, you also then lost that. So it was fascinating to watch. So the first king was like, oh, they're talking about overthrowing me, so I'm just going to seize all of their money so they can't.
Yes!
It failed because then they were like, we're not giving you our money, civil war. So
yes!
He was deposed. I also intentionally put in a mechanic where I rolled a dice, and the probability increased every day, and there was a chance that the king and queen could just die. And then the next person in line in their house took over. So there wasn't a guarantee they were always going to have a good monarch. So the person that took over the first king, she was a better monarch. Then she died after day 2, and the next 2 people in line, they just abdicated because they couldn't handle the pressure. Because middle school was coming in trying to sow discord because they were frustrated that they could only attack on Fridays. So they wanted to try and weaken the kingdom so that when they came in,
oh my God, that is awesome.
So then finally that kind of stabilized with another civil war, another competent learner became queen, except she was broke now because of the civil war. So the first king came back and said, oh, she has way less money than me. I'm going to try and overthrow her again. So another civil war breaks out.
Holy shit.
At this point, the entire kingdom is broke. The middle schoolers come in on Friday and they're like, hey, we're in charge now because you can't do anything about it. So for about a week, the middle schoolers ran the elementary classroom. They decided all the rules. And here's the thing. They passed laws. Nobody had any money to vote against them. So one of the laws they passed was whatever we say goes. And then there was no voting again.
No way. Oh, that is awesome.
Until they got things running smoothly enough, because the balance was set to where the more they were off task, the less well-ran their studio was, the more money they had to pay to upkeep their kingdom. And the less money they made. Whereas the better they did, the more money they made, and the less they had to pay in upkeep. So it was like rewarding them for running their studio well. So the middle schools came in, got it running really well. Everybody had a lot more money, and then they overthrew the middle schoolers and then actually had a decent idea of how to run themselves.
That is awesome. That you need to write that down, because that is awesome. Because like all I'm seeing is England and France and the United States. Like I'm seeing all these countries, and I can literally picture them in my head with all that. That is awesome.
Imagine if the average American had that kind of experience in elementary school. The oldest kid that we had in that class was 12. The youngest was 8, and they went through this experience together.
Awesome. That is exactly how things should be run as far as government goes. That is 100%. Just keep doing experiments. Just keep, you know what I mean? Just keep doing experiments, and they can find out. I feel like you should do something with communism. I feel like you should write the rules as far as communism and see how far it goes. I really do. Or
Yeah,
like
that's something
democratic socialism or socialism, and just see kind of what happens.
That's something we've talked about. I think it would have to be in some of the older classes, though, which we need more. We're still really small. We've only been around for like 4 years. But
Okay.
just because I don't think that the younger kids would be able to understand the lesson behind that yet. It's really kind of
right.
Now, we absolutely want to run something like that, but I think it needs to be older.
I would be incredibly curious. I feel like I would love to see that from start to finish, as far as what happens, how it goes, like all of it. That would be very interesting to me.
Well, and I very intentionally left it really ambiguous how the houses ran themselves. And so they had houses where they all pooled their wealth, and they all said, hey, we're all going to just take out this big bucket together. And they functioned relatively well. Now, there were people that didn't contribute enough, but it was also a really small group.
Right.
And so it'd be interesting to see like how that scaled and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's like real communism. You try to implement communism on a national scale, and it fails, and it ends in a lot of death and famine and poverty.
Communism is like the F of communism stands for food. Nobody gets it.
I think it speaks a little bit to what I was saying earlier. Like I think communism works when it's voluntary on both sides.
Yeah.
Right.
If communism on a small scale, that's how you get communes.
Right.
And those function all right most of the time.
My family is relatively communist in the sense of like it's I give my kids what they need and I expect from them what they can give, but it's also a very different structure than a governmental society sort of thing.
Right.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, we have a saying in my household is, we're capitalists, but in the home we're communists, and my wife and I are the dictators.
Right.
So,
but I mean, to be frank, we're running this Minuteman experiment kind of communist.
Oh no, we're capitalists.
Well, I mean, but we're talking about sharing and pooling resources.
Well, yeah. I guess so.
But I would be genuinely curious. I would, if I had the money, I would fly out there for the month that it took for that to happen, because I'm genuinely curious about all of that. That is a very cool thing. It's very cool what you're doing, and I wholeheartedly support that.
Yeah. You could move to Montana and open one of those schools here.
Yes.
My children aren't school age yet, so, you have time.
I feel like the whole communism thing is going to be great all the way up until it just crashes and burns spectacularly.
It was really funny because we did establish with the Rome one different classes, because that was the thing in Rome. So the wealthiest 3 members of the studio were the patricians. And it's interesting how history mirrors itself every time we've ran this, because they started talking about how to identify people who were and were patricians. They're like, what if we have this red cloth? What if we had armbands? To identify. No. We're like, that wouldn't be a good image for the school. Kids walking around with red armbands.
Wait, you could do the complete opposite too, and go like anarcho-capitalism, where you just tell them like, hey, anything goes, and see if they form their own types of government too.
Yes.
See, that's because
I feel like
we've had periods that have devolved into that just because they aren't doing what they're supposed to do and off task and stuff. And there's only so much because again, the philosophy is for them to figure out how to solve the problems. So ultimately our goal is to point at the problems and help them find a solution as opposed to fixing it for them. So we had times last year where it was rough for me because it was chaos, and it was hard for me not to be like, hey, you're stupid and you're doing this wrong. Right. So that's kind of like the natural state of things. And then things do kind of evolve out of that. They're like, hey, this is garbage. We don't want to be like this. And they start trying to slowly find solutions.
Interesting. Man, that's so interesting. That is really cool. I feel like you need to do a deep dive on that. That is something that I would not be able to put down, because that is super interesting. You know what I mean? I love that experiment. I think that is a great experiment that you're doing over there.
Another thing that would be really interesting to do, but you wouldn't be able to do because it would be not ethical, would be rat utopia, but with kids. Or mouse utopia. Was it mouse utopia or rat utopia?
I think it was mouse.
Mouse utopia.
Yeah, I think it was mouse utopia.
Yeah. That was an interesting experience.
Just be like,
You
hey,
can
there's
do
no
it.
rules. Just go do whatever you want. Like,
Yeah, you have everything that you could ever need. Go for it.
right.
Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a little bit opposite. They were kind of fighting.
Yeah,
to
they were
survive.
fighting for food and meat and pigs and
Yeah.
God, that's really cool. That is super interesting. I
that
wholeheartedly
cool?
support that. Yeah, that is awesome. That is a way to do, man.
All right.
Speaking of,
We're running up on time, so we probably ought to
All right.
wrap this.
And I guess in closing, get out there, train, work out. Know that no one's coming. It's up to you.
well, and
Yeah.
I would say, like, kind of with that, like, we started and we went down lots of rabbit holes, but the world is really generally crazy and especially kind of unstable, it seems like right now. And I feel like the thing that's going to matter to you most isn't what's happening around the world, it's what's happening where you are. Because when things go to shit around the world, it's the people around you that are going to be whether you live or die. So it's important, I think, to recognize what's happening, and your energy shouldn't be looking out, it should be looking in.
Definitely. And remember that nobody is going to do things for you. You need to be the one that takes action. You need to be the one that creates the change that you want to see. And with that, thank you for listening to our Minuteman Theory podcast, episode 3. We're going to hopefully be coming out with these more often. But for now, I guess we'll see you later.